over at Subscribe or check out the Odyssey and Rumble. So Star Wars by Disney doesn't have a plan. It has good costumes and sets, which is actually a great start. And it also has the name, or it had the name recognition and positive vibes that used to go along when you heard Star Wars. That used to be a very powerful, like ordinarily you hear Star Wars and you're like, oh, you have the rights to make some movies within the universe. You should be just printing money. That has not happened. And because all that goodwill associated with Star Wars, all of that is gone now. And a lot of Disney is also wasted. A lot of the Disney name association, what people used to associate with Disney 10 years ago would be 2013. That was that you were still in the Pirates of the Caribbean days. And that was pre this 2015 Star Wars days. So that was kind of the last, like, yeah, Star Wars or Disney was, always a left-wing company, but that was before that first 2015 Star Wars movie came out and people were kind of set back in their seats a little bit like, this is the direction this isn't just the direction Star Wars is going in, it's the direction Disney is going in. And in the beginning, when they heard that, I think they sold it to Disney in 2012 or something, people thought, Disney is going to take Star Wars and just hit a home run with it. And then they saw what they did with it and like, this is the new direction of Disney, which is such a departure from the Pirates of the Caribbean day, which I think Disney did. And now when you think of Disney now, what do you think of? And if you're on YouTube, you're probably online a little bit more than other people, at least in these areas of pop culture. But by now, most people have come to associate Disney with, they're just kind of vaguely woke now, which seems to trigger the left-wing Twitter kids. So Disney Plus, I don't know if it's a cash cow or not, but I kind of wonder if it hurts them in the long term because it's the B list. People are kind of getting the feeling that it's the lower budget place for Disney to just throw crap against the wall and see what sticks, which doesn't have to be a horrible idea, except that if it's in the hands of the insufferably woke know-it-alls, then it's not going to work out. You have to have creative people who are from across the spectrum, and that just is not what Hollywood is all about now. So in a set like this, you get killer sets, costumes, actors, and all the tech necessary to make it amazing. I mean, the technology they have to make these like 3D green screen types of stuff, and it looks fantastic. But if you have woke writers, then you don't have anything that's worth watching. I mean, like the Mando, those costumes alone that you see on screen from the original Star Wars trilogy, if you're familiar with the original trilogy, that evokes such a strong memory for you, and it's a positive reaction. And then you remember that it's not Star Wars, it's Disney Star Wars, and then you go, it's going to be, I'm sure one of the episodes is going to be about like gun control and pronouns or something. So Disney had the chance to tell Star Wars stories, and they could have created something that would have honored Lucas and the universe that he created, but they didn't. They ruined it. All they had to do was accept the setting that they bought and paid $4 billion for. But it's the conflict between transformative versus curative. If they had just maintained the story honoring the original vision, then they would have had hits on their hands. People would rather have stuck with the vibe created in 1977, even if in this modern day the left wing considers it politically incorrect. Most people don't care because we don't agree with these mentally ill commie kids who run around calling everyone a Hugo Boss if they disagree with them. So there was no way Disney was going to be able to tell a Star Wars story without making it woke cancer. That isn't who Disney is, which should have been obvious post the 2015 version of woke Star Wars. When you saw the movie, you knew Star Wars was over, and you could see the death clock ticking for Disney. Disney can make movies, but they don't want to make what the audience wants to see and pay for, which is the simplest way of stating the obvious. We represent millions of customers. Disney asks us why we're not paying for their product. My answer, one reason, well, the race swapped characters. That's a hard no. If the Star Wars universe or Ant-Man was set up to look a certain way with certain characters, then that's what we want to see. And when Disney hears that response, they don't know what to do with it. It's just that, the blue screen for them, because they're not making movies for people like us. They're not interested in making movies that sell to the largest audience, as crazy as that sounds. Their goal is to push a narrative. Go take a look at the original trilogy, then compare it to the new stuff. The sets and costumes might be the same, but the people are very different. They replace the people who made the original characters, and people are not fungible. If you replace one group for a different group, the entire show vibe changes because the people watching the shows have different associations in mind with the different people who play different characters, which seems to be a hard thing for Hollywood to understand. Disney either assumes people will be on board with it or prefer that these new actors to the old actors, but that doesn't, I mean, logically, none of this makes sense. You're like, but they got on board with the show because they are familiar with the original characters. Why wouldn't you continue what they got on board with it for? Why are you, like, you're using the name recognition to bait them, and then you're switching out these characters? It's classic Hollywood bait and switch. Because they're not making movies, they're making propaganda. Anyway, so if you say you prefer the original characters, then sometimes the actors themselves, I think the guy who played Obi-Wan, and maybe some of the directors will go on Twitter and dogpile you for being istophobic. And if the mob can dox you, then they'll call your employer and try to get you fired because you said that you like the old Star Wars or Star Trek or Doctor Who or whatever, or Willow. So people learn to remain silent, but they also are not going out to watch Andor, Star Wars, and I think Obi-Wan had a show. I don't remember what that one. Some black chick was in it, and something about her people didn't like, or they didn't like the story or something. So immediately he comes out and does a little car video. I don't know. I didn't see any of that. And I think there's a bunch of other Star Wars shows, but like people aren't talking about them because. And the people who are making the shows are confused why the watch time is so low. The Andor Star Wars guys gave an interview, and like the lack of self-awareness, like, oh, it's weird. We thought we'd have a home run. We thought we had a built-in audience. It's Star Wars. It's like, no, it's not Star Wars. It's Disney Star Wars. Perhaps you've not been paying attention if you're surprised by nobody's watching Andor Star Wars. They replace the original, and it'd be great to have conversations with these people, but like that you just know that's not going to happen. So they replace the original characters with purse puppies, and if you criticize it, you're de facto istophobic. They set up a construct where you can't criticize the show at all. Otherwise, the Mary Sue will say a bunch of far right whatever chased Rose Tico off of Twitter. You mean like they tried to do to Gina Carano? Oh, well, that's different. Yeah, no, not really. So once they have the shield of istophobicism to raise, there's really no possibility of having a conversation because that's going to be their defense to everything. If they have a pox character, someone who's got that, the privileged place on the hierarchy, then all critics are bigots wearing Hugo Boss because the pop culture media is nothing more than a propaganda arm of Hollywood. Even calling it woke cancer triggers these problematic slacktivist kids, but who are all wearing the same eyeglasses. But of course, they don't watch the shows either because nobody does. She-Hulk, Willow, Blood Rain from The Witcher, Rings of Power. Maybe there's a few others. What was the other one? Oh, Robert Jordan's book. What was that show that came out? I forget. Robert Jordan's book series was turned into, I think Amazon did that series. I'm sure they paid a lot for it. I'm sure it was expensive, and it's just it came and went. Like, it's out there, I believe, but nobody's talking about it, which is not a good. I can't remember the name, but it's not a good sign. Wheels of Time, maybe, but to say that it's cringe offends them. They don't watch, but they want the shows to kind of exist as sort of a neon sign of a virtue signal to, I don't know. Who? Karl Marx, maybe? They want the Rose Tico t-shirt, but they don't want to watch the movies or at least not rewatch them. Because, yeah, people watch the Disney Star Wars, the 3 movies that came out. They didn't watch Solo. But they didn't rewatch any of the movies. They didn't go, check them out on streaming, buy the DVDs, the Blu-rays, anything. They should have issued VHS tapes. Like, I know people don't have VHS players anywhere, but it would have been kind of funny. Anyway, so the director says that the storyboard skeleton is pretty loose, which is not a good sign because the universe is already created. There are timelines going forwards and backwards. I was going to say, especially if you're familiar with the extended universe of Star Wars, they have the they do everything like pre the Battle of Yavin. And so these books go back, a long, long way, the history of the Sith and whatnot. But was it Kathleen Kennedy did some interview of Star Wars like 10 years ago, before when they're coming out Disney? We didn't have anything to go on. And you're looking at books like there's a few thousand books that were written, and then there's probably a few dozen that are really, really famous. Who's the guy? There was a couple trilogies that one was. I forget the Hand series, the tie-in with Darth Vader. But there's a couple that are really famous, and to have her do this interview and just like, yeah, so there's no books, no comics, no nothing to go off of. You're like, what's the color of the sky in your world? Like, shouldn't you be familiar with the IP before you set to work on it? And the thing is, didn't she work for Lucas too in the old days? Anyway, this isn't a new story universe like A New Hope sort of is, where you can kind of do whatever you want because you're doing it for the first time. But I mean, even then, Lucas still had the prequels in mind, so he still had internal rules that he had to follow because he had that story thing was outlined also. The story has to hit certain narrative points, which is why people outline the story and figure out the logistics of it. The Star Wars universe is huge and detailed. It's a puzzle piece. It all has to fit together roughly. You don't just take a stab at it. You figure out the story, plot points, the timings, the sets. And in the old days, you still had to figure out things like weather for when you were filming, those kind of things. But nowadays, there's more stuff done with those, green screen and CGI and stuff. But it's not rocket science to make a movie, but it does take planning and, actors availability. But they're just, what they're doing here is they're like kind of putting characters on the sets together, and they have loose stories roughed out. But they're hoping the nostalgia will sell. That the member berries that South Park brought that term into usage, which is a really like that. South Park is doing so many things ahead of the time, and you look back and go, "Whoa, you guys were like 10 to 20 years ahead of your time." But it doesn't, like, the member berries don't sell because it doesn't, like, the sets and the costumes. Oh, it looks like Star Wars, and then you kind of you look a little bit closer, like, what are you guys doing here? I feel like this is some kind of Russian propaganda out of the 60s. Like, oh, you're Istophobic. Yeah, that's what I thought you were going to say. And, honestly, firing Gina Carano was the last straw for a lot of people because she said absolutely nothing that got her deserving of being fired. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you guys on the next episode.